The survey party came down from the ridge on the third morning of October 1893, because the weather had closed in overnight, and the granite above the tree line was too slick to work. There were 6 men under contract to the North Carolina Geological Survey, and they had been mapping the upper watershed of the Tow River in Mitchell County for 11 days. The party leader, a field geologist whose surname appears in the survey records only as Eckard, had filled 2 field notebooks with strike lines, formation notes, and elevation measurements since the first week of the season. He expected nothing unusual from the descent through the hollow below the ridge. The survey report for Mitchell County, filed with the state geologist's office in Raleigh in January of 1894, records what happened next in a single line, wedged between a note on a quartzite intrusion and a river gradient measurement. A passage of apparent artificial origin was discovered in the north face of a granite exposure at approximately 4,200 feet elevation, 1.4 miles northeast of the old Tarleton homestead site. That is all the report says. One line, in a survey document, that elsewhere fills half a page on a minor feldspar deposit and 2 full pages on the depth of a mica vein. No dimensions follow the sentence. No photographic record is proposed. No recommendation for further study appears anywhere in the pages that follow. The brevity, in a document built from accumulated measurement and detail, is itself a form of record. The entrance to the passage sat back beneath a natural overhang of the parent rock, sheltered enough that the interior floor was dry after 3 days of rain on the hillside above. The air temperature inside, measured that afternoon with a pocket thermometer, held at 51 degrees Fahrenheit, while the air at the hollow's rim stood at 38. Eckard's field notebook, the physical volume, survives in the collection of the North Carolina State Archives in Raleigh, catalogued under the Geological Survey papers for Mitchell County. Page 47 records that the party entered the passage to a depth of approximately 60 feet on 2 oil lanterns before it turned, and the far end moved beyond their light. The width at floor level was 4 feet and 2 inches. The width at shoulder height was 4 feet and 2 inches. It varied by less than half an inch over the entire measured distance. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The ceiling height held within 3 inches of the same point throughout the run. What the notebook records in the margin alongside these figures, in Eckard's own hand, is the observation that has anchored every subsequent argument about the passage. The note reads, "Walls show no percussion marks, no abrasion patterns, no fracture lines consistent with natural spalling." This is not a dissolution feature. The granite of the western Blue Ridge in Mitchell County belongs to what geologists call the spruce pine pluton, an igneous rock mass running through several counties of the North Carolina highlands that is among the densest and hardest material in the eastern United States. Its purity is unusual enough that the spruce pine district became, in the 20th century, the primary domestic source of high-grade quartz for semiconductor manufacturing and optical glass production, industries that require a material with almost no interior variation. The district has been commercially quarried since the early 1900s. Mining companies have removed hundreds of thousands of tons of this rock by controlled blasting and precision industrial cutting, and those operations leave characteristic signatures in the adjacent stone, percussion patterns, tool scarring, blast fracture lines radiating from the worked face. The passage above the Tow River shows none of these. You cannot dissolve this rock with water. You cannot crack it cleanly without considerable applied force. Karst passages, which form through chemical dissolution in limestone, require an entirely different geology. Lava tubes, which form through drainage of molten material in basalt, require volcanic conditions that have not existed in this region for hundreds of millions of years. Granite does not hollow itself into rectangles. There is no natural mechanism by which it produces passages of consistent measured width, running 60 feet into a hillside, or 200, or any distance at all. Eckard's notebook holds 2 further observations that did not make it into the published survey report. At the turn where the passage moved beyond the lantern light, the floor transitions from natural granite to a surface that has been brought level. not worn smooth by repeated foot traffic, but worked to a plane. The spirit level he carried confirmed the floor at that point as true horizontal to within 1 degree. On a north-facing slope at 4,200 feet in the Blue Ridge, a true horizontal interior floor means that whoever shaped it had engineered the passage to drain toward its own entrance. The second observation, written below the measurements in a different ink and apparently added after the party returned to camp that evening, reads, "No soot on ceiling, no fire-making debris, no cultural material of any description, no evidence of occupation, only the passage." The single word Eckard, placed above his toolmark note, slightly apart from the rest in the margin, is the word a measuring man reaches for when the measurements themselves are the finding. That word is controlled. Every visitor who went into that passage in the century after Eckard reported the same sensory conditions. The temperature holds steady regardless of the season outside. No wind moves through it. Sound behaves differently inside than it does at the entrance, flattening in a way that suggests the passage continues well beyond what any lantern or flashlight has reached. The walls, when examined closely, are neither wet nor dry in the way exposed granite surfaces normally present. They hold a faint equilibrium, as though the rock has been sealed from the outside air for a very long time. Researchers who have pressed their palms against the walls describe the surface as colder than the ambient interior temperature should account for. That detail appears in Eckard's notes, in Callahan's account from 1957, and in Ware's Field Journal from 1984, independently and without any of the three men apparently having read the others. 3 separate descriptions of the same quality across 91 years from people working without coordination. The passage produces the same impressions because the passage has not changed. The survey report reached Raleigh in early January of 1894 and was reviewed by Joseph Austin Holmes, North Carolina's state geologist since 1891. Holmes ran a commercial program. His priorities were the mica and feldspar deposits of the western counties, the coal geology of the Piedmont, and the practical mineral resources of a state in active industrialization. Mitchell County was on his schedule for its pegmatite exposures and their value to the abrasives trade. He marked Eckard's field note for referral, and in February of 1894 forwarded a copy of the relevant page to the Bureau of American Ethnology in Washington. The Bureau had been active in the southern Appalachians since the late 1870s. Its field teams had documented Cherokee earthworks, settlement patterns, and material traditions through the mountain counties for more than a decade. The Bureau's correspondents also had access to what the Cherokee themselves reported about the stone structures of the high mountains. The Cherokee traditions recorded in that period describe an older people as having occupied the mountain country before the Cherokee arrived in the region, a people referred to in some accounts as builders who lived inside the hills. Those traditions do not attribute the stone structures to the Cherokee. They describe the Cherokee as inheritors of a landscape that already held stoneworks they had not made. The Cherokee oral traditions, documented by ethnologist James Mooney in the 1890s, published by the Bureau itself in 1898 as part of his study of Cherokee myths and sacred formulas, describe the Yunwi Tsunsdi, small beings said to live inside mountains and rocky places, as having been present in the high country long before human habitation began. The traditions are specific about the underground character of these beings and their association with stone. Mooney recorded them as legend and moved on. That distinction was noted by at least one Bureau correspondent in relation to the Mitchell County Passage and was not recorded as evidence of anything requiring investigation. The Bureau's response to Holmes, a letter dated March of 1894 that survives in the State Geologist's correspondence file in Raleigh, was brief. The passage was inconsistent with any documented form of Cherokee construction. The Cherokee did not work granite. Their material traditions ran to wood, bark, wattle, and packed earth. The Bureau's files held no oral tradition attributing the cutting of stone passages in the mountain granite to any people the Bureau had documented. The letter suggested the passage might be a colonial mining prospect and recommended that a site inspection be mounted when resources permitted. The site inspection came in October of 1896. The Bureau assigned it to a field ethnologist who had spent 3 years documenting earthwork sites in the Ohio Valley and was considered methodical. He arrived in Mitchell County with 2 assistants, a plate camera, and magnesium flash powder for interior documentation. The photographs taken during that visit were submitted to the Bureau's records office in Washington at the close of the field season. Their current location is not known. The accession records for the Bureau of American Ethnology Photographic Archive at the Smithsonian Institution show no photographs attributed to Mitchell County, North Carolina, for any year between 1890 and 1900. The photographs are not listed as transferred or lost. They are simply absent, and to find the absence you have to know to look for it. The field report from the 1896 visit survives only as a summary abstract in the Bureau's published annual report for that year. The abstract runs to 73 words. It describes the passage as a natural geological feature of uncertain formation origin and recommends no further investigation. It does not cite Eckard's measurements. It does not note the leveled floor or the consistent width. It does not address the absence of tool marks. It does not explain why a natural geological feature required a plate camera and magnesium flash powder to document. The photographs were taken. The photographs are gone. The report that followed their disappearance characterizes the site as natural. That is the complete official record of the 1896 investigation, and it has not been supplemented or revised in the 128 years since. The passage received no further institutional attention. It was visited 3 more times in the 20th century by researchers working outside any institutional framework. A geology professor from Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina, whose name appears in the site's limited documentation as D. Callahan, spent 4 days at the passage in the summer of 1957 and produced a written account of his observations for submission to the Journal of the Geological Society of America. The paper was declined without review. He published a condensed version in a regional natural history quarterly the following year, where it received no correspondence and generated no citation in the literature that followed. Callahan moved his research program entirely into igneous petrology the year after that and did not return to the subject. The career change was not explained in print. A team from the Early Sites Research Society spent a week in the Hollow in August of 1973. Their internal report identified the passage as belonging to a class of enclosed stone structures documented along the Appalachian Range, and noted its similarity in construction geometry and in the complete absence of cultural material to sites the organization had been documenting in Vermont and Massachusetts. The report was circulated within the organization and did not enter the public record. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. A researcher named Philip Ware worked the site for 2 weeks in the summer of 1984 using modern surveying equipment and produced the most detailed measurement record of the passage that exists. Ware confirmed the total documented length at 231 feet before breakdown material in the passage ahead required him to stop. Over that entire distance, the width varied by no more than 3/4 of an inch. The ceiling held within 2 inches of the same height throughout. The floor, where not covered by fallen debris, remained true horizontal to within 1.5 degrees for the full measured run. 231 feet of consistent geometry in granite, holding its own dimensions tighter than many dressed stone structures of the known historical period. Ware corresponded with the Early Sites Research Society for 2 years after completing his survey and did not discuss the site publicly after 1986. His notes are in private hands. The pattern that Ware and the Early Sites Research Society team both identified, the resemblance between the Mitchell County Passage and anomalous stone structures elsewhere along the Appalachian Range, is the element no single site rebuttal can reach. The Mitchell County Passage is not alone and never has been. In Rutland County, Vermont, 4 miles east of the town of Proctor, a stone chamber documented by Warren Dexter in the 1970s presents a configuration of enclosed space that mirrors the Mitchell County geometry across a distance of several hundred miles. The Proctor chamber is built from fitted granite slabs, rather than cut into solid rock, but the interior width at its entrance measures 4 feet and 4 inches, and the ceiling at the chamber's deepest interior point measures 5 feet and 1 inch. The chamber aligns to the winter solstice sunrise with a precision Dexter documented photographically across multiple successive years. On the solstice morning, the first light enters the passage and travels to the back wall, striking a point 2 feet above the floor. It holds there for 11 minutes before the angle changes and the light withdraws. That alignment required whoever built this chamber in the Vermont Granite Highlands to understand the geometry of the winter horizon well enough to engineer it permanently into stone. In Groton, Connecticut, the complex of passages and enclosed structures, known as Gungywamp, was formally surveyed beginning in the 1970s and shows the same pattern of construction without cultural attribution. The Gungywamp complex covers approximately 2 acres and includes multiple chambers, a double-circle stone formation, and a passage known to researchers as the Chamber of the Petroglyphs, where carved symbols on one interior face have not been attributed to any documented indigenous tradition of the northeastern United States. The structures run to consistent internal dimensions over considerable distances and include passages documented to align with solar events. The standard explanation for all such structures is colonial European construction, root cellars and storage chambers built by early settlers. Colonial root cellars did not incorporate astronomical alignments. Colonial settlers building agricultural storage did not maintain consistent interior widths over 100 feet of constructed passage, and they left abundant material evidence of their work in the form of tool marks, hardware, and datable debris. The Gungywamp structures contain none of this. Then there is the Upton Chamber in Worcester County, Massachusetts, a corbelled stone passage 14 feet long that opens into a circular domed interior, 8 feet across and 7 feet tall at the crown. The Upton Chamber appears in colonial-era land records, meaning the European settlers who mapped the region found it already standing before they began building their own structures. Carbon dating of organic material associated with the site has returned construction dates in the range of 1000 BCE to 500 BCE. Those dates predate any documented European presence in North America by more than 1,000 years. They also predate any named stoneworking culture in the northeastern United States that the current archaeological record acknowledges. The state of Massachusetts classifies the Upton Chamber as a colonial root cellar. That classification has not been revised. None of these sites is the Mitchell County Passage. They are separate constructions, in separate materials, at separate elevations, across hundreds of miles of the Appalachian range. But what runs through all of them, regardless of the difference in construction method and location, is the same set of physical characteristics: consistent interior geometry, worked or engineered floors, astronomical orientation where the structure permits it, the complete absence of cultural debris, no surface trace of the building or cutting process. These are not individual anomalies accumulating without connection. They form a pattern along a mountain chain, and that pattern has not been given a name by any institutional body with the authority to classify such things. The pattern is also not something that can be attributed to a single known culture and moved on from, because no single known culture of the pre-Columbian northeastern United States occupied the full length of the Appalachian range, worked in both cut granite and fitted granite slabs, left no identifying cultural material at any of these sites, and demonstrated a consistent understanding of solar geometry across constructions separated by hundreds of miles of mountain terrain. The argument that these structures were made by different unrelated groups working independently, who happened to produce the same geometry and the same absence of identifying debris at sites from North Carolina to Vermont, requires a coincidence the physical record does not support. The geology of the Blue Ridge creates a specific obstacle for anyone attempting to date the Mitchell County Passage by the methods available to modern science. Granite does not accumulate the organic material that carbon dating requires. There was no fire in the passage and therefore no charcoal. There was no food preparation and therefore no bone. There was no timber support structure and therefore no wood. There is only the passage and the stone is part of an igneous body old enough that no surface dating technique currently applied to geological formations can narrow the window of the cutting to a range useful for historical argument. Whatever made this passage, the granite itself cannot be made to say when. What the passage requires, if Eckard's figures and Ware's survey are taken at their face value, is a culture capable of cutting consistent geometry into some of the hardest rock in the eastern mountains over more than 200 continuous feet without leaving any surface trace of the cutting process. No percussion marks rules out hammer-driven chisels of any material, no abrasion marks rules out grinding, no fracture lines rules out thermal spalling, the technique of cracking stone by alternating heat and cold water. The wall surface is smooth in the way that long water action on stone produces smoothness, but in rock that shows no evidence of water movement and sits at a considerable elevation above any plausible water source. The tools that could produce that result in granite of this density by any physical mechanism currently understood are not present in the pre-Columbian archaeological record of North America. The closest parallel in the documented world is the surface finish observable on certain passages and granite elements in Old Kingdom Egyptian construction, where walls and blocks of comparable rock hardness display a consistency that researchers have not been able to attribute to the known tool assemblage of the period. That parallel has been identified by independent researchers working in both contexts and has been set aside by institutional archaeology in both contexts for the same reason. To take it seriously requires acknowledging that the established model of what was technically possible, and when, and by whom, is incomplete in a way the field does not yet have a name for. Eckard's field notebook is in the North Carolina State Archives. The catalog entry is accurate. Page 47 is legible. The marginal note about the absence of tool marks can be read without magnification by any researcher who requests the volume. Nothing has been removed from the record. The record has simply sat in its archival box for 131 years, correctly catalogued and functionally unread, because no institution with authority over the classification of archaeological sites has ever declared the Mitchell County Passage to be something that requires an explanation. The Bureau of American Ethnology's photographs from 1896 have not been located. Ware's survey notes remain in private hands. The passage itself is still in the north face of the granite exposure northeast of the old Tarleton homestead site, at 4,200 feet in the Blue Ridge of Mitchell County, North Carolina. The overhang that sheltered it in 1893 still shelters it. The floor is still level, the width still holds, the walls still carry no marks. The 4 words Eckard wrote in pencil in the margin of page 47 on a wet afternoon in October of 1893 remain the most precise description of what the passage contains that any surviving record holds. They are also the 4 words the only official investigation ever conducted into the site specifically declined to repeat in its published findings. This is not a dissolution feature. Something cut it, with precision, over more than 200 feet of the hardest rock in the eastern mountains, and left nothing behind to say when or how. The passage has not changed. The official record has not been amended. The gap between what the stone shows and what the record says has remained exactly the size it was on the morning Eckard walked out of the hollow and wrote down what his measurements required him to say. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.